Turn this little speaker on. Sorry, so I'm in Job chapter 1, and it says here, "In the land of Uz there lived a man whose name was Job. And this man was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. And he had 7 sons and 3 daughters. And he owned 7,000 sheep and 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen and 500 donkeys, and had a large number of servants. And he was the greatest man among all the people of the East. And his sons used to hold feasts in their homes on their birthdays. And they would invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. And when a period of feasting had run its course, Job would make arrangements for them to be purified. Early in the morning he would sacrifice a burnt offering for each of them, thinking, 'Perhaps my children have sinned and cursed God in their hearts.' This was Job's regular custom." Here we get a glimpse of who Job is, and it paints a very flattering picture of him. This is a man who has it all. He's got wealth, he's got a wife, he's got a big family, he's got friends, he's popular in his day. He's exceedingly blessed, and not just is he blessed physically, but he's a blameless man. That doesn't mean he's sinless, but he's blameless in the eyes of God. He tries his best to have a relationship with God, to be devoted to God. He's a good guy, and he lives well. And his children, they feast together on their birthdays. And you know what? Actually, that tells us something about his children, that they're actually good people too. There's a lot of reasons you could feast, a lot of reasons you could party. But to celebrate a family member's birthday, that's a legitimate reason for it. They're not celebrating the idols. They're not having feasts and debauchery and ways that are inappropriate. I mean, most of us today celebrate birthdays, do we not? So that in itself that's not a condemnation. That's actually a testament to when they celebrate, when they party. His children feast together on birthdays, and Job even offers sacrifices on their behalf just to make sure, just to ensure that they are always right with God. So that's the life that Job has and the way that he's trying to live. So let's look at Job's suffering, Job's loss. Here in chapter 1, verses 13, what is it that he has to go through, his ordeal? So we're going to look at several different verses here throughout the book of Job that really paint us a good picture of this. In chapter 1, verses 13, it says, "One day, when Job's sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, a messenger came to Job and said, 'The oxen were plowing and the donkeys were grazing nearby, and the Sabaeans attacked and made off with them. And they put the servants to the sword. And I am the only one who has escaped to tell you.' And while he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, 'The fire of God fell from the heavens and burned up the sheep and the servants. And I am the only one who has escaped to tell you.' And while he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, 'The Chaldeans formed 3 raiding parties and swept down on your camels and made off with them, and they put the servants to the sword, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you.' And while he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, 'Your sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, when suddenly a mighty wind swept in from the desert and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it collapsed on them, and they are dead. And I am the only one who has escaped to tell you.'" Here we see Job has lost all of his material wealth. His possessions are stolen away. His property has been destroyed. His servants have been killed. All 10 of his children have been tragically killed by this storm. He had 500 yoke of oxen. He had 500 donkeys. They're taken by raiders, and the people that he had working those fields, they've been butchered, they've been murdered. The 7,000 sheep that he's had, they were consumed by fire raining down from heaven. The 3,000 camels are taken by raiders. And again, the people watching them, they were murdered too. Job is financially ruined here. He's lost everything physically that he had. And his children, they're all together at a birthday party celebration. We're told that that's when they feasted. And so during one of their festivals, during one of the times when we should be celebrating a birthday among the family, all of his children are tragically killed by a random freak tornado that has swept in and destroyed the house that they were all in. This is a terrible event, and it's just back to back to back, all on the same day. In verses 7 of chapter 2, we see that not only this, but Job's health is taken from him. He is afflicted with sores and terrible agonizing pain all over his body from head to toe. And if that wasn't enough, on top of his health being taken away, in chapter 2, look in verses 9, his wife says to him, "Are you still maintaining your integrity? Curse God and die." His own wife turns her back on him. His own wife is saying, "It's just better off if you die. I don't want to have anything left to do with you. Just curse God and just be struck dead." And understand, too, that she's speaking from her own pain. She, too, has just lost 10 children. So she's in a tremendous pain right now. She's in a very terrible spot. But this isn't just where it stops. Look over in chapter 7. In Job chapter 7, this is Job talking about his condition and what he's going through. Here in verses 13, look what it says. It says, "When I think my bed will comfort me, and my couch will ease my complaint, even then you frighten me with dreams and terrify me with visions, so that I prefer strangling and death rather than this body of mine." You know, sometimes when we are sick, when we are really struggling, we have this habit of just thinking, well, if I just need to go to bed. I just need to try to reset the day. I try to and just close my eyes and just try to put all of these thoughts out of my mind. And here Job's saying, I can't even do that. I can't even rest. Because when he closes his eyes, when he tries to just go to sleep and just turn his brain off, he's plagued by horrifying dreams and visions. He's tormented when his eyes are closed. So he can't even get a good night's sleep. And we'll get into this more of next week, but you know, here he's attributing this to God, and ultimately it does come from God, but the person doing this is the devil. And I can't imagine what a nightmare from the devil would sound like and look like. The terror that he might be filling Job's mind with when he tries to close his eyes and he tries to go to sleep. And in chapter 19, turn over there, there's more. It doesn't just stop there. Here in Job 19, in verses 13, again, this is Job crying out about what he's going through and what he's having to endure. In verses 13, it says, this is meaning God, this is Job talking, it says, "He has alienated my family from me. My acquaintances are completely estranged from me. My relatives have gone away. My closest friends have forgotten me. My guests and my female servants, they count me as a foreigner. They look on me as a stranger. I summon my servant, but he does not answer. Though I beg him with my own mouth, my breath is offensive to my wife. I am loathsome to my own family. Even the little boys scorn me. When I appear, they ridicule me. All of my intimate friends detest me. Those I love have turned against me." Everybody has turned their back on Job. No one wants to be around him. His friends, his neighbors, his co-workers, his servants, his wife, his extended family, they've all abandoned him. You put all those things together, this man is truly in a terrible, dark place. And so Job's reaction to this is something that we should look at. Because his reaction both to the tragedy that has befallen him and also to the despair that he has in his heart. If you would, turn back to chapter 1. So let's look at his reaction to all of these terrible events happening. When he first starts getting the bad news of everything that's happening right at the beginning, it says in chapter 1, verses 20, it says, "And at this, Job got up and he tore his robe and he shaved his head. And then he fell to the ground in worship. And he said, 'Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will depart. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. May the name of the Lord be praised.' And in all this, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing." Job, in a moment of tragedy, in a moment of utter grief, he takes time to worship God. And he worships God in his distress. And in chapter 2, in verses 10, when his wife tells him to just curse God and die, just die already, like nothing good is going to happen from this point forward, you got nothing left to live for. His reply to her in verses 10 of chapter 2, he replied, "You're talking like a foolish woman." And that word foolish there, it also can be translated an immoral woman. He says, "Shall we accept good from God and not trouble?" And in all this, Job did not sin in what he said. Job refuses to curse God no matter what he's going through. Now, initially, he worships God and he doesn't sin in charging God for doing wrongdoing, but here it says that he doesn't sin in what he said, because you can tell that this is eating at him. He does think that an injustice has been done to him. And over time, as more and more bad things are happening to him and nothing else good is coming down the pipe that he can see, you can see that this bitterness and this resentment build up in Job's heart. Here in chapter 3 of Job, look at verses 11. This is him crying out. He says, "Why did I not perish at birth and die as I came from the womb?" This is verse 11. And verses 12, "Why were there knees to receive me and breasts that I might be nursed? For now I would be lying down in peace. I would be asleep and at rest." He's saying, look, why was I even born? Why did God even let me be born? Why did he let me grow up? Why did he let me have a family? If this is how my life is going to go, if this is what I'm going to have to endure, why did God even let me live? And in chapter 3, later on here, in verses 20, he says, "Why is light given to those in misery, and life to the bitter of soul, to those who long for death that does not come, who search for it more than for hidden treasure, who are filled with gladness and rejoice when they reach the grave? Why is life given to a man whose way is hidden, whom God has hedged in? For sighing has become my daily food. My groans pour out like water. What I feared has come upon me. What I dreaded has happened to me. I have no peace, no quietness. I have no rest, but only turmoil." You see what he's saying here? He's saying, what's the point to life? Why is all this happening to me? It's not fair. Why are good people made to suffer? Why is it that some people that they seem to try to do everything right and they have to suffer death and pain and agony? And other people, you just let them go on living, God. Why is this? And they don't have to deal with these problems. In chapter 7, his crying out to God, it keeps going and going here, but we get a better mindset of where he's at mentally here in chapter 7. Look in verses 17. This is him asking these questions to his friends and also to God. He says, "What is mankind that you make so much of them? That you give them so much attention? That you examine them every morning and test them every moment? Will you never look away from me or let me alone even for an instant? If I have sinned, what have I done to you? You who see everything we do. Why have you made me your target? Have I become a burden to you? Why do you not pardon my offenses and forgive my sins?" Job is saying to God here, just leave me alone. Why are you picking on me, God? Why do I have to go through this? I'm innocent. I haven't done anything to deserve this. What have I done to you, God? Why are you punishing me? And in chapter 10, look in verses 1 of chapter 10. Job says, "I loathe my very life. Therefore I will give free rein to my complaint and speak out in the bitterness of my soul. I say to God, do not declare me guilty, but tell me what charges you have against me. Does it please you to oppress me, to spurn the work of your hands while you smile on the plans of the wicked?" He's saying, God, what have I done to deserve what you're making me go through in this life? Does this make you happy, God, to see me so miserable? He says, look, there are wicked people out there in the world, and they're living just fine, and they don't care about you. And here I am trying to live a right life, trying to be devoted to you, and look what you've brought upon me. The misery that I'm having to deal with. I'm ruined and I'm cursed because of you, God. Why? And look in chapter 16 here. In verses 12, Job says this. He says, "All was well with me, but he," meaning God, "shattered me. He seized me by the neck and crushed me. He has made me his target. His archers surround me. Without pity, he pierces my kidneys. He spills my gall on the ground. Again and again, he bursts upon me. He rushes at me like a warrior. I have sewed sackcloth over my skin and buried my brow in the dust. My face is red with weeping. Dark shadows ring my eyes. Yet my hands have been free of violence, and my prayer is pure. Job's saying here, this is all your fault, God. This is all your fault. I was doing just fine until you came along, God, and you did this to me. I'm innocent here. I'm the victim. God doesn't care about me. Job is in a very dark place. And really, he's a man at his wit's end. He's a man who's lost everything, and he's seeking desperately for answers. He's trying to make sense of the misery and the pain and the suffering that he's having to endure. And ultimately, he just wants to understand why. Why is he having to deal with this suffering and this loss? And we get another little tidbit over in Job 31 verses 35, where Job acknowledges he has no idea why any of this is happening. Now, next week we'll look into this, but we see behind the curtain. And we as the reader of Job, we get a sense of what's going on behind the scenes, but Job doesn't have that insight, and he never gets it. In Job 31:35, he says, "Oh, that I had someone to hear me. I sign now my defense. Let the Almighty answer me. Let my accuser put his indictment in writing." He's saying, I have no clue. I don't understand what I've done to deserve what I'm going through. And if you look over in chapter 38, God answers Job. And the lesson that we're going to take away from this is that when we're going through real suffering and real loss and real grief, we need to make sure that we don't question God's goodness and we don't blame God for what we're going through. Ultimately, we need to trust in Him. Here in chapter 38, God responds to Job. And starting in verses 1, it says, "Then the Lord spoke to Job out of the storm, and he said, 'Who is this that obscures my plans with words without knowledge? Brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know.'" Look over in chapter 40, because God, He really gets into Job here. Chapter 40, verses 1. "The Lord said to Job, 'Will the one who contends with the Almighty correct him? Let him who accuses God answer him.' And then Job answered to the Lord, 'I am unworthy. How can I reply to you? I put my hand over my mouth. I spoke once, but I have no answer. Twice, but I will say no more.' And then the Lord spoke to Job out of the storm. 'Brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. Would you discredit my justice? Would you condemn me to justify yourself? Do you have an arm like God's? Can your voice thunder like His? Then adorn yourself with glory and splendor. Clothe yourself in honor and majesty. Unleash the fury of your wrath. Look at all who are proud and bring them low. Look at all who are proud and humble them. Crush the wicked where they stand. Bury them all in the dust together. Shroud their faces in the grave. And then I myself will admit to you that your own right hand can save you." When God responds to Job here, you know what He's saying? Who are you to question me? To question what I allow? God says to Job, if you were a God like I'm God, then I'd answer you. We could sit down, we could talk about it. I would explain why I'm doing what I'm doing. But Job, you're not God, you're just a man. I'm God, you're not. And God is saying, I don't owe you an explanation. And that is a very hard lesson for us to accept as people. That is a hard lesson for Job. It's a hard lesson for us. But we really need to understand this. We are the created. We are not the creator. We need to know our place. And this is hard. I think it's especially hard for Americans because we live in a society, which is a great society, but as a society from birth, we are taught, we are raised that we are free. We are free men and women. And because we are free, our leaders answer to us, right? The president answers to the people. Congress answers to the people. We put them in power. So we are owed an explanation for why things are the way they are. But that is not our relationship to God. And that's a big difference that we really need to wrap our minds around. Chapter 9 of Romans makes this same point, and we won't turn over there for time's sake, but I encourage you to go read that chapter when you have some free time, because ultimately the message is made clear over and over again. God is in control, and it's God's prerogative. God's will be done, and it's not up to us to question that will. We need to accept that it's God's reality for Him to do what He wills with it. It's ultimately about trusting God. It's about believing in our heart that God truly does know what's best, even if it doesn't make sense to us. In chapters 38 through 39 of Job here, God is going to ask Job a series of questions. We'll look at a couple brief examples. In chapter 38 here, verses 17 and 18, God says to Job, "Have the gates of death been shown to you? Have you seen the gates of the deepest darkness? Have you comprehended the vast expanses of the earth? Tell me if you know all this." In verses 21, he says, "Surely you know, for you were already born. You have lived so many years." God's being sarcastic there. Look in verses 31. "Can you bind the chains of Pleiades? Can you loosen Orion's belt? Can you bring forth the constellations in their seasons, or lead out the bear with its cubs? Do you know the laws of the heavens? Can you set up God's dominion over the earth?" Then look in chapter 39, verses 26. God's saying to Job, "Does the hawk take flight by your wisdom and spread its wings towards the south? Does the eagle soar at your command and build its nest on high?" God is citing example after example, from the greatest things that we know in the universe to the smallest details on earth, showing that God is in control of all of it. He sees all of it. He understands all of it. He knows how everything works and how it all works together. He's making the point that He is sovereign over everything. God is pointing out how little Job and really mankind understand about this universe, and how arrogant it is for man to think that they know better than God what's fair or not, or how things ought to work or not. God's making the case that Job and really mankind is just not in a position to question Him. And it really comes down to this, and this is the point God's trying to show Job. Job, your point of view, your perspective on what life is just too small. It's too limited. You as a human, as a man, you can't fathom what I know and what I allow and why I allow it. And in chapters 40 and chapters 41, God will go on to describe two great creatures, the behemoth and the Leviathan. In chapter 40, He talks about the behemoth. And here, when you look at the description of what this creature is, I think it's the best way to describe it would be a dinosaur. Some people say that it's an elephant. Some people say it's some kind of hippopotamus or a rhino. I don't think that the description matches that. I think when you look at the description there, what you see is a great grand dinosaur, something like a brachiosaurus. You know, if you ever watched the Jurassic Park movies, it's the one with the long neck, super huge and massive. As God's describing a creature like that. And in chapter 41, He goes on to describe Leviathan. And this is what we might today call a mosasaurus, a big sea serpent, some kind of aquatic dinosaur like you see in those movies too. And the point God is making is He's saying, look, these creatures that I made, they're not evil, but they're not safe either. And the point God is making over and over again here is He's saying, look, the world is great and the world is good, but it's no longer perfect. God is saying the world has order and it has beauty, but it's also wild and it's dangerous, just like those creatures. So why is there suffering? Well, God never answers Job. He doesn't give Job the answer that Job wanted, because ultimately the why is really besides the point. God makes it clear that suffering is simply a part of this life. Job wanted this big explanation as to why he was suffering and why he had to experience loss. But ultimately, God's response to Job, the lesson Job learns is God saying, you just have to trust me, Job. You just have to trust that I know best. And here's the truth that Job finally has to come to realize. See, if suffering is unavoidable in this life, and it is, then the solution to suffering has nothing to do at all with understanding the why behind it. The solution to suffering is to have a relationship with God that you can take comfort in when you do suffer, because you're going to suffer. It doesn't matter how you live. Everyone is going to suffer to some extent in this life. And Job acknowledges this over in 28:28 of Job. Job acknowledges that God's message is the fear of the Lord. That is wisdom, and to shun evil, that is understanding. You see, in the end, Christ is the ultimate answer. We're to be Christ-like in the way that we live. Well, what did Christ suffer? What did he have to go through? He was humiliated, he was mocked, he was abused, tortured, experienced a horrible, cruel execution on a cross. Did Jesus deserve any of that? No. No, he didn't. Suffering is not to be avoided in this life. Whether we deserve it or not is missing the entire point. Suffering is something that we should face head on. And the Christian life is an invitation to suffer. It's delayed gratification to the 9th degree. We give up and we suffer and we go through trials and tribulations in the here and now for a better tomorrow in heaven with God. When suffering occurs, and it will, then ultimately we just need to be prepared to do it well, to suffer properly the way that Christ did. And as Christians, we should embrace suffering up to the point of death as spiritual training. Trusting in Christ is how we get through life suffering. You know, over in Job chapter 9, in verses 33, Job actually has a moment of revelation, and he says, if only there were someone to mediate between us, someone to bring us together, talking about him and God, someone to remove God's rod from me so that his terror would frighten me no more. And then I would speak up without fear of him, but as it now stands with me, I cannot. Job saw a need for a spiritual mediator between himself and God. And Jesus Christ is that mediator. In 1 Timothy 2, 5-6, it tells us this. This isn't something we have to guess at. It says, for there is one God and one mediator between God and mankind, the man Christ Jesus, who gave himself as a ransom for all people. Jesus is the ultimate answer to suffering in this life. If you turn over with me to Job chapter 42, let's look at the conclusion of the book, the conclusion of everything that Job has to go through and endure, because there's two powerful points that we can make about this before we wrap up the lesson. So ultimately, Job understands the message that God is giving him, even though it's not the answer he was initially seeking, it's the answer he got. And Job repents of having the thoughts that he did and blaming God the way that he did. And then he prays for his friends. And here in 42 verses 10, it says, and after Job had prayed for his friends, the Lord restored his fortunes and gave him twice as much as he had before. And all his brothers and sisters and everyone who had known him before came and ate with him in his house, and they comforted and consoled him over all the trouble the Lord had brought on him. And each one gave him a piece of silver and a gold ring. And the Lord blessed the latter part of Job's life more than the former part. He had 14,000 sheep and 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen and 1,000 donkeys. And he also had 7 sons and 3 daughters. So here it states that God doubles everything that Job had. 500 yoke of oxen become 1,000. 500 donkeys become 1,000 donkeys. 7,000 sheep become 14,000 sheep. 3,000 camels become 6,000 camels. But notice here that it says that his 7 sons and 3 daughters, God gives him 7 sons and 3 daughters. Why didn't God double the children? Why wasn't it 14 and 6? Why was it just 7 and 3 to replace the 7 and 3? If God doubled everything Job had, why didn't he double Job's children? Have you ever wondered that? Well, the answer is he did. You see, Job was blameless in the eyes of God. That's how the book starts. And Job's sons and daughters were right with God. That's the point that gets pointed out in the first chapter. The author is making that very clear. See, the wealth, it was just lost. It had to be totally replaced. but his children were not lost. They were dead, but they weren't lost. From heaven's perspective, God did double Job's children. Because Job one day would be in heaven with 14 sons and 6 daughters. And there he would be with them for all time, in paradise with God. And just as Job was rewarded and comforted in the latter part of his life, so too we will be rewarded and comforted in heaven with God, if we persevere through the trials and the sufferings that we have in our own life, just like Job did. This is what Job teaches us about suffering and loss. This is the message of that. And again, it's pointed out in Scripture. Over in James 5:11, it says, "As you know, we count as blessed those who have persevered. And you have heard of Job's perseverance and have seen what the Lord finally brought about. The Lord is full of compassion and mercy." Thank you so much for your time this morning.
Hey there, it's Matt Muccigrosso with Shively Church of Christ. Thank you so much for listening. If you like what you heard, then hit the like button on the video. Subscribe to the channel if you want to hear more. If you have questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comments below. We do read those and respond to them. If you are local to the Louisville, Kentucky area, we would love to have you join us for worship service. We meet on Sundays at 9:30 and Wednesdays at 7. Again, thanks for listening. Have a great day.